Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. We made it into 2020 in one piece, gang. So welcome to not only a new year, but a new decade of opportunity, excitement, and maybe even a little mischief too. Now, my mission, though, remains the same, and that's to share stories of how technology is transforming our lives, work, and indeed world, and also try and learn a few things from each other along the way. So today, I've invited Vanessa Wu, Rippling's General Counsel, onto the podcast. And we're going to talk about the transformation of integrated HR and IT, including the vital role that strong, stable software integrations are going to play for startups, in fact, in businesses of all sizes in the coming year. And another topic I want to explore is the California Consumer Privacy Act. And if you haven't heard of it, from me watching from afar, sat here in the UK, it sounds to me like the beginning of the US getting their very own GDPR. So I'm incredibly intrigued on how that is going to go down and how everybody is perceiving that in the US. And also if businesses are ready and preparing for it. But enough from me. Come with me all the way to San Diego, where Vanessa Wu is waiting to speak with us. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I think first off, Happy New Year and welcome to 2020. I am Vanessa Wu. I'm the General Counsel of Rippling, which is an all-in-one HR and IT solution. And because those words don't really mean much to most people, what that means in practical terms is we provide payroll, benefits, HR software. We also do app provisioning, single sign-on, password management, laptops, and I'm sure I'm missing a few others. But essentially, those are services that are provided by other businesses as well. But how we are unique is we unify all of those systems. These traditionally disparate systems, we connect all to the employee data record. And we believe by doing that, we free up a ton of time by automating a lot of administrative work. As the general counsel, that means I'm the lawyer. I'm doing air quotes over here, which means no one's really quite sure what I do. I probably have one of the more vague job descriptions, but essentially I protect the company legally. And touch a bit of everything from corporate events like financing and M&A to product counseling, our equity program, our policies, regulatory outreach, and also compliance with law is really important. And data security and data privacy laws being chief among them, seen as we're this employee data system of record. And it was that theme, this employee data system of record theme, that really drew me to Rippling, given that my background has really been in this field for quite some time. I started, just for some context, in private practice at the international law firm of Latham & Watkins, practicing antitrust law in San Francisco. And so we represented and worked against a lot of these big tech firms. And I became really interested in how easy it was for these companies to kind of pass through antitrust reviews, because the antitrust laws in the US and in Europe were not really well equipped to understand this new digital economy where companies weren't really charging consumers anything. Like Facebook and Google, they're free. They're really charging data. And at the same time, while I was at Latham, I was working on a lot of pro bono cases with the ACLU on government surveillance technologies, like cell site simulators and stingrays, and became really interested in this erosion of data privacy that was happening at the same time. After Latham, I joined LiveRamp, a publicly traded marketing technology company, became quite familiar with how the data economy works. And because data privacy and security are so important to that industry, I was heavily involved in the GDPR and California Consumer Privacy Act readiness efforts. And then earlier this year, as I mentioned, I joined Rippling, whose unified system approach I saw as having the ability to really tackle data privacy and data security in a mature way for this next era of digital rights. So that's, I guess, it's just a little bit about my history.
It sounds like you're incredibly busy. And first of all, a big happy new year to you too. We are here in a new year. And not only that, a new decade of exciting opportunities. And I just think technology is just going to continue to transform our world in a way that we can't even begin to imagine. And I do think it's incredibly timely that you're with us here today, because 2020 really does begin a new era for digital privacy in the US too. And it's going to impact consumers and companies nationwide, from everything from small businesses to tech giants. So with that in mind, can you tell us a little bit more about this new law that just went into effect, which I believe is called the California Consumer Privacy Act, and also maybe highlight why it's so significant?
Yeah, I love that you're calling 2020 the new era for digital privacy. I think this is really going to be one of those big issues of our time. And before talking about the California Consumer Privacy Act specifically, I think it's important to understand the context, because no company is really limited to their national borders anymore. With the internet, most companies are in a form global companies. And what we're seeing is this huge global conflict between Europeans who really view data privacy as a fundamental right. It took me as an American a while to really understand that, but for Europeans, their privacy is core. And especially in Germany, where there's this national history of World War II and the Holocaust, and this real tangible memory of government surveillance, Europeans really view digital rights and their own data as something that is very personal to them and something that's extremely important. In the US, we just don't have that history. Our Constitution, our federal Constitution, does not. It has a right to free speech. It even has a right to bear arms, but it does not contain a right to privacy. There are some state constitutions that do, but our U.S. Constitution does not. So in the U.S., we've traditionally viewed data as more like property. Like, I found that penny, I'm going to pick it up. Or it's something that you can trade with people. It's something that you can exchange. It's something that you can pay for. It's almost becoming like a form of currency. And so there's this conflict between, is it a fundamental right, or is it a piece of property that can be traded like currency that we're really dealing with? Between Europe on the one hand and the US on the other hand. So in the US, in California, we now have the California Consumer Privacy Act, which goes into effect on January 1st, 2020. So here we are. And it is really the California or the US's haphazard answer to Europe's General Data Protection Regulation that went into effect last year. It is the first kind of omnibus piece of privacy legislation in the US. We've had specific pieces of legislation governing just health data or governing just credit data, but we've never had in the US an omnibus privacy and security legislation that covers all types of personal data. It's significant, really for that reason, but for the first time, consumers in the US will have the right to know, or Californians at least, will have the right to know what personal information is collected from them, whether companies are selling that information, and they can demand that companies delete it. So that is huge. That's never existed in the US before, even though Europeans have enjoyed these rights for about a year now. The other really significant thing that I don't think is being played out as much in the press is that for the first time in the US, there will be a statutory private right of action for data breach litigation. Now, that was just a ton of jargon that I threw out at you, but what that really means is class action lawsuits. So GDPR had the huge headline last year because the penalties were $20 million max penalties, or 20 million euros, or up to fines of 4% of one's global annual turnover. I think the big headline for CCPA should be the fact that just regular consumers can gang up together in a very litigious society, the United States, and sue you. And you can bet that plaintiffs' attorneys are just waiting to file these big lawsuits, these big costly lawsuits. So those are the main significant factors of the law. What it has also done is it's been a catalyst for a number of other states. So there are over 20 other states that are considering privacy and security laws of their own. And so really this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Wow, it really does. And it feels like such a huge game changer moment. And I think I should also highlight that you've spent your career at the forefront of privacy and antitrust law, and you've worked for clients such as Facebook and Mozilla and litigated landmark cases, including one before the European Commission. And like you mentioned, we've had the GDPR over here for some time now. It was a horrible experience as it was going in, and everyone was panicking on how to make the most of it and staying on the right side of that legislation. So over there, how are big companies reacting to this new privacy and security regulation, such as CCPA, especially with that threat of lawsuits hanging in the background if they get it wrong?
Honestly, they are lobbying right now. That's probably where they're spending the majority of their resources. I don't think most people know how CCPA came to be. It's actually a really interesting story. There's this guy, Alistair McTaggart. He's a real estate developer in San Francisco turned privacy advocate. And apparently he was just at a dinner party or some sort of party and came across a Google engineer who said something along the lines of like, you wouldn't believe all the data we have and what we do with it. And so really out of his personal pockets, he spent $3 million, I believe it is, to fund a ballot initiative in California. Because in California, we have this weird system where if you get enough signatures, you can get a law on the books, and then all of the residents of California just vote on it. And it's a bit of a majority rules. The big tech companies were lobbying really, really hard against the passage of CCPA, but then Cambridge Analytica happened in the middle of that, and it no longer became a good look to be fighting against the California Consumer Privacy Act. You didn't want to be the person saying you should get less privacy. So they essentially, the California legislature worked with Alistair McTaggart to make it into a law through the California legislature instead of the ballot initiative. And they did that in the course of 1 week. So it was really like a haphazard law that came about. But in terms of your question, in terms of like how these companies are now dealing with it, they've now moved those lobbying efforts to the federal level. And I think we see a lot of activity trying to get federal privacy legislation passed. Without the negative spin on it, I do think federal privacy legislation would be a good thing. It would add a lot of clarity to the business community. The negative side, though, is that there are a lot of big dollars coming in from the biggest tech firms trying to help craft that legislation to be as easy on them. So, I think that's the main way that these big tech companies have been reacting. In terms of specifics that they're implementing, they have publicly all made different positions in terms of yes, we're going to be in full compliance, or I think Facebook has recently said that their position is that they don't sell data. And I actually technically that is probably right. Facebook is so big that they don't need to send their data to third parties. They can bring everyone to their platforms. But I think that highlights kind of an impact, potentially unintended impact of these omnibus privacy legislations, which is that they impact the small guy a lot more than the big guys. The Facebooks and Googles of the world, they don't need to disclose data to a third party because Facebook has enough users on its platform that they can attract advertisers to their platform and say, hey, you have a new baby organic food company. Well, we can give you an audience of new mothers in a high income bracket who live in coastal cities to target. Whereas a podcast like yourself or, our local newspapers, they don't have that reach. And so they need to work together, which means, exchange data to be even moderately attractive to the same advertisers. So I think really the main kind of impact of these laws have been like a ton of compliance burden more on the smaller players.
And for the founders or business owners listening to this podcast, there's going to be a lot of people thinking, well, how can I better prepare for this CCPA and how it's incoming there? So can you expand on how Rippling is helping customers protect that sensitive data and comply with the new law, especially as they're working with so many different apps and tools that all have access to this continuous stream of data, don't they?
Yeah. So, I mean, how can companies prepare for CCPA? I think first, they should make sure that CCPA applies to them. It's going to primarily apply to more consumer-facing companies, B2B companies that have, a lot of users, or companies that are heavily involved with data, such as like artificial intelligence type companies. The specific categories are 25 million or more in revenue, data about more than 50,000 users, or more than 50% of your revenue coming from data sales. So, I mean, first, making sure that it applies. Otherwise, I think the key hallmarks of CCPA preparation or any data privacy legislation preparation are making sure you have really good data management practices, because you're going to become liable for those third-party data breaches. So you want to know, do you want to do your data inventory? You want to know where your data is coming from, where it's going, so you have that full insight to that. And Rippling is a fantastic platform because of our connected systems. We can provide that insight from an HR and IT perspective into your data flows. And the second part is you really want to be investing in security. Look into like really solid encryption and redaction practices. These are practices that we have incorporated at Rippling by default, and are things that we hope companies that use us, or just companies out there, are taking really seriously in this new age of digital privacy and security. And with that, like encryption and redaction practices, we're essentially trying to offer tools to our customers to help them be more secure. So we offer single sign-on, we offer password management, because we believe these are best-in-class practices for how organizations should run. The worst thing one can have is an employee be fired or leave the company and still have credentials to some of the most sensitive systems at a company. And with Rippling, because we provide this all-in-one solution for like onboarding, offboarding, payroll, benefits, yada, 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 we can automatically, when someone is leaving your company, you can see that all of their systems have been deactivated, that their laptop has been returned and deactivated. And as a legal person, that definitely helps me sleep at night.
And just you talking about all those different scenarios there brought back flashbacks of my IT past, because one of the reasons I'm excited to get you on the podcast today is because back in those IT days, I dealt with clunky HR software, and it just seemed to make life more difficult for HR staff and created a bit of a strain in a relationship between HR and IT. So can I ask you, tell the listeners a little bit more about how Rippling solved those kinds of problems? Because I think it had that reputation for so many years, but that's changing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so traditionally, HR and IT solutions have been disparate, and even within HR, solutions have been disparate. What I mean by that is in IT, so like within HR, you have payroll companies like ADP, you have HR software companies like Workday, you have different benefits administration solutions, and as a result, if like I, Vanessa, have a child, that may be a benefits issue. You may need to enroll them in a different type of health insurance. But that also impacts my payroll because now there are, my health insurance costs something different. And so my paycheck should be maybe a little bit less. And we traditionally have seen, teams of folks in HR departments literally transcribing spreadsheets from one to the other to make sure that when an employee has a life event, that their payroll is changing appropriately. When they change jobs, maybe they get promoted, they need to be added to different, like a manager alias, that also needs to be manually added. And we just think this is the wrong way to run a company. There is a lot of risk when you move from system to system to system to system. There's a lot of administrative headache when you move from system to system to system to system, and there's a lot of error that can occur. And so our founders really dreamed up that they felt the right way to have this enterprise software power a company and power a company efficiently is for HR and IT to be integrated. That there's so much synergy there that if you really first think about the employee data record and build the software solutions on top, that you can power a bunch of business applications seamlessly and automatically. So that is the big proposition that we see at Rippling.
And at Rippling, you also provide customers with so many security features like password manager and managing employee devices and cloud applications. And as the ex-IT guy, all that stuff really appeals to me because I know the importance of it. So as businesses look to improve and hit the ground running in 2020, what can they do to become more secure and worthy of their customers' trust? Because that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, some key things are making sure that you have good insight into where all of your data is going, because Rippling kind of sits in the center of that by helping manage all these different HR and IT platforms, but also helping connect a bunch of applications. I believe we have over 500 applications integrated with our system. You can really see just where all your data is going. That is having that insight is going to become increasingly important from both the privacy and the security perspective. The other piece is, making sure that, you are investing in like a password manager so that passwords and credentials to all of these systems are not being shared willy-nilly, that they're being shared with who you want them to be shared with, and that they're not being stored. Like we offer this password management solution called RPass, but we do so in a zero knowledge way, meaning that we don't actually have access to the specific credentials. We see that today companies are, sharing data with many, hundreds of vendors, and that these data breaches are occurring. I think I was reading a study recently that over 50% of data breaches were occurring with vendors. So making sure that you have really good insight into who your vendors are first and what they're doing with your data is really key, and that Rippling can help with that. And then finally, just encrypting and redacting data. Since we've been talking about CCPA, what I failed to mention was that one of the exclusions, where you won't get hit with that litigation is if you encrypt and redact data. That's explicitly stated in the statute. That encrypted or redacted data will not be subject to the penalties. And so we think it is really important that businesses really consider that.
And something else I also remember from my IT days is when a new person entered the company, we'd have IT with a 20-page document and navigating through various applications to actually set up a new account. And then on the flip side, HR would have a similar process, a similar 20-page document and multiple screens just to get the person on the system. So what stood out for me when I was doing a bit of research about Rippling is on your website, you claim that in only 90 seconds, a company can not only onboard a new employee and set up their payroll, health insurance, work computer, but also third-party apps such as Gmail, Microsoft Office, and Slack. So can you help people listening understand why that's such a dramatic improvement in the way employee onboarding actually works, or usually works, should I say?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious sort of what your own experience has been like. I mean, I think that is exactly right. Most companies, if you search, like employee onboarding, you'll get tons of checklists. Remember to email the person a welcome email. Remember to tell them where to go. Remember to order a laptop so that it arrives on time. Remember to install XYZ software on that laptop. On their first day, make sure you collect and look at their immigration paperwork. Make sure you get their t-shirt size, and so on and so forth. It can be really, really painful to manage all of this in spreadsheets, which is what most people do. So what Rippling does is we were built on the belief that it really doesn't need to be this hard, just that there haven't been technology companies focused on helping automate this process for companies. And so basically, a hiring manager will go into Rippling. They'll fill out basic info about a new hire in Rippling, their role, their salary, their location. And Rippling, through software, will automatically send them an offer letter and automatically set up that new employee's payroll, benefits, access to all their apps and tools. If you are using our laptop services, we'll even order a laptop for them so that it arrives on the day that they're starting or before that when you specify. And it will come pre-installed with the software that you believe is appropriate for that role. So you can set up that all engineers need access to GitHub, that the finance team should be receiving PCs instead of Macs. And you can put this logic in our system so that when you're actually doing the onboarding, you're really just doing a click of the button because you've already predetermined how you want your company to run. That's basically it. I know it sounds kind of magical or too good to be true, but because we really take this approach that if you have the right data about employees and you put the logic on top of it, you can build really powerful systems. It really is that simple.
And you did make it sound incredibly simple, but I know how complex it is to get to that place. And so kudos to you for getting there. But I mean, where do you go from here? What's next for Rippling? Anything else that you can share with us about your vision for the future?
Yeah, I mean, we're really just continuing to grow and expand. We really only did a formal go-to-market over the past year, and we've seen just an incredible response, which has really validated the need for this type of solution, this all-in-one solution. But I think we're just going to continue focusing on driving that expansion and also adding functionality. We see a lot of, what we say internally is that we want to bring enterprise-grade software to small and medium-sized businesses. And what we see in the market is that there's kind of these stunted solutions. There's solutions without all of the functionality that companies really need to operate their businesses fully and in compliance with all of these laws. And we don't believe it should be like that. We believe that small businesses and medium-sized businesses should have access to this, to all of the bells and whistles. And so we're kind of, I think someone in our company once said, it's like Apple in the front, Android in the back. We have the Apple in the front. We're going to continue working on that Android in the back and bringing additional features and tools to our users as their businesses grow.
Fantastic. Well, a huge thank you for coming on and joining me today and sharing your story. But before I do let you go, could I ask that you remind the listeners of where they can find Rippling online and also contact your team if they are left with any questions after listening to our conversation today?
Sure. We are at rippling.com. You should definitely check us out. As a, somewhat data privacy nerd, I don't use a ton of social media for my work life, but I am on LinkedIn and you can email me. I'm at Vanessa@rippling.com.
Excellent. Well, you did say a few moments ago you're curious on my own experience. Well, as the IT guy, typically my experience of the HR IT divide was the manager forgetting to fill out that new starter form, forgetting to order that laptop, but announcing that they start in 10 minutes. Can we do it this morning? That was pretty much my experience on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
So for those reasons alone, it really makes me appreciate the great work that you're doing here and how you're eradicating stories like that to the past. So thanks so much for taking the time to share it with me today.
Yeah, no, we hope this is the way of the future for the benefit of all, so businesses can just have a little bit more time back to work on what they truly are trying to work on.
I cannot thank Vanessa enough for recording this podcast with me today. And if you want to peek behind the curtain of how I work, I'm going to let you into a little secret here. Vanessa and I recorded that conversation on New Year's Eve. So the fact that she took the time to speak with me means so much. So Vanessa, if you're listening, huge thank you for speaking with me on New Year's Eve. Now, the California Consumer Privacy Act certainly sounds something that every website and business owner will be following closely in 2020. And I am interested if the US are going to embrace this GDPR-like legislation or if they're going to throw it out. And I also loved hearing in my conversation with Vanessa today that in only 90 seconds, a company can onboard a new employee and set up their payroll, health insurance, work computer, and third-party apps like Gmail, Microsoft Office, and Slack, all by using rippling. For me, that is completely mind-blowing. Like I said a few times in the interview, as an ex-IT guy that worked closely with HR and things and also saw the complicated IT process, I know what a big deal this is. But that's it from me. Thanks so much for tuning in throughout 2019 and joining me again in a new year and a new decade. Remember, please, my door is open to each and every one of you if you need me for anything. If you're thinking of starting a podcast, if you need help with your business blogs, or you just want to send me a question or share your insights on today's or any episode, whatever it is you need. Remember, I'm just an email away, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You get me on Twitter at Neil C. Hughes. And the same on LinkedIn and everywhere else. So a big warm thank you for listening from me, sat here in the UK. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.